All right, let's dive into the world of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Sounds good.
We're using Anshel Pfeffer's biography, Bibi.
Okay.
This book is packed with details about Netanyahu's life and political career.
Right.
We'll try to understand how he stayed in power so long
Okay.
and his views on the Palestinians.
And a Palestinian state?
Yes, and how his leadership shaped Israel's approach to conflict and peace.
It's a complex story.
Ready to get started?
Definitely. Pfeffer's book really digs into Netanyahu's personality and strategies.
It seems crucial to understanding his political longevity, right?
Absolutely.
So let's go back to his childhood.
Okay.
Pfeffer talks about his family being deeply rooted in revisionist Zionism,
Uh-huh.
which, for those who don't know, is a more hardline form of Zionism,
Right.
advocating for a greater Israel.
And it gets really interesting when you consider his father.
Benzian, right, a staunch Zionist who chose to live in the U.S. during much of Bibi's childhood.
Exactly.
This tension between his father's beliefs and actions must have had a huge impact on young Bibi.
Yeah, I think so. Pfeffer suggests that it made Bibi feel like an outsider, even within his own movement.
Like he always had something to prove.
Yeah, to validate his Zionist credentials,
That ambition is a recurring theme throughout his life, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And this brings us to his military service.
Specifically his time in the elite Sayeret Matkal unit.
Right.
That's where Netanyahu the warrior starts to emerge.
I agree.
Pfeffer highlights how that experience really shapes his belief in strength and decisive action.
Things that became central to his political career later on.
Absolutely.
Uh,
But Pfeffer doesn't shy away from the complexities either.
no, he doesn't. He explores some of the controversies surrounding Netanyahu's military service as well.
Like the Entebbe raid.
Exactly.
His brother Yoni's death during that mission made him a legend.
And it's become a big part of Bibi's political narrative.
Right. But Pfeffer also digs into some lesser-known aspects, too.
Yes. Like the challenges Yoni faced as a commander.
Even being temporarily removed from command before the Entebbe operation
It adds a layer of nuance to the whole heroic narrative.
makes you wonder how much of that narrative was, I don't know, maybe manipulated for political gain later on.
It's an interesting thought, and it leads us to his transition from soldier to statesman.
From diplomacy to politics.
His time as Israel's ambassador to the UN was crucial
It definitely honed his public speaking skills,
and exposed him to the power of media,
which he clearly learned to wield effectively.
to say the least.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
No, not at all. Pfeffer reminds us of that hot tape scandal.
Almost derailed his early political career.
That leaked recording where he seemed to admit to some pretty unethical tactics.
Really exposed a personal vulnerability.
But it also, strangely enough, made him more popular among some Likud members,
It reinforced that image of him being under attack.
which became a major theme in his rhetoric.
So even bad press could be spun to his advantage.
In a way, yes.
That's fascinating. Okay, let's move on to Netanyahu's views on Palestinians and a Palestinian state.
This is where things get really complicated,
Pfeffer lays out Netanyahu's ideology,
which essentially boils down to limited Palestinian autonomy.
but a firm no to a fully independent Palestinian state in the West Bank.
Exactly.
This belief has shaped his policies for years.
His unwavering support for settlements.
His tough stance against Palestinian demands.
It's all connected.
And it often contradicts his own public statements about wanting peace.
Absolutely. There's this constant tension between what he says and what he does.
He talks about peace.
But then his government approves new settlements,
It's a strategy that has caused a lot of frustration.
both in Israel and internationally.
Pfeffer also points out how Netanyahu uses fear to his advantage.
The threat of terrorism.
The Iranian nuclear program.
It creates this climate of anxiety,
And the message is, only I can protect you.
which resonates with a certain segment of the population.
The ones who constantly feel threatened.
That makes it very difficult to challenge him.
It seems very calculated. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about his relationship with the U.S.
Oh, that's a whole other story.
Been a roller coaster, to say the least.
Pfeffer details his relationships with different presidents.
Clinton.
Obama,
Trump?
lots of clashes.
Over peace negotiations.
His alignment with certain political factions in the U.S.
His attempts to influence U.S. policy.
It's all there.
So we're talking domestic politics.
International relations.
All intertwined.
It's like he's playing multiple chess games at once.
But even with all this maneuvering, Pfeffer doesn't portray him as someone who's totally in control.
Right. He also talks about the accusations of corruption.
And his I don't know, increasingly authoritarian tendencies
which have really polarized Israeli politics.
and deepened social divisions.
Makes you wonder about the long-term consequences of his leadership.
It does. And Pfeffer's book stops at 2018.
But it sets the stage for understanding everything that came after.
And that's what we'll be exploring next. Okay, so Pfeffer's book ends in 2018.
Right.
But a lot happened after that.
A lot.
Things got pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. And in 2018, those corruption investigations were heating up.
The ones against Netanyahu,
Yeah, multiple cases.
gifts from billionaires.
Shady deals with media.
It was a lot.
It really cast a shadow over his time as prime minister.
So how did he respond to all that? Did he lose his grip on power?
He went on the offensive, of course.
Classic Netanyahu.
Yeah, doubled down on that us versus them rhetoric
Painting himself as a victim.
of a political witch hunt.
And it worked.
For some,
They still saw him as a strong leader,
being unfairly targeted by the elites.
so he weathered the storm. For a while, at least.
For a while.
But other challenges were coming.
Right, like his relationship with Trump.
He was president then
And they were very aligned,
on key issues.
especially Palestinians and Iran.
Remember when Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
Oh, yeah.
That was huge for Netanyahu.
A major win.
But controversial internationally.
Very.
But it played well to Netanyahu's base.
Reinforced his image,
The strong leader
standing up to international pressure.
delivering for Israel.
Exactly.
But even with Trump's support,
Right.
Netanyahu still had problems at home.
Oh, absolutely.
He called those snap elections in 2019,
Thinking he could win big.
using his foreign policy successes.
And his ties to Trump.
But it backfired,
He didn't get a clear victory.
which led to that political deadlock
It was a mess.
and then that power-sharing agreement.
With Benny Gantz.
His rival,
That was unprecedented.
first time he shared power,
Some thought his control was slipping.
but it didn't last.
No, collapsed in 2020.
Triggered another election,
This time he faced a more united opposition.
all wanting him out.
They were tired of him.
And they succeeded.
In June 2021,
His time as prime minister ended.
after 12 years,
A historic moment.
it really was.
The end of an era.
Some were relieved
But it also raised questions.
about Israel's future.
So a new government formed.
Led by Naftali Bennett.
Right wing.
Yeah,
But very different.
this new government
It was a coalition
of many parties,
from right to left.
even an Arab party.
For the first time.
Remarkable.
Driven by a desire for change.
And what about the Palestinians?
They took a more pragmatic approach
Focusing on economics,
in the West Bank and Gaza,
not peace negotiations.
but trying to reduce tension.
That's promising.
It did.
But this new government had problems too, right?
Oh, yeah. Unity was hard.
With such different parties.
They struggled to agree
Bennett was under scrutiny.
from the left. And then it collapsed.
Mid-2022.
Another election.
Israeli politics was a revolving door.
Did people still want change?
It was different this time.
The unity against Netanyahu?
It was gone.
People were disillusioned.
Tired of the instability.
To miss Netanyahu.
They craved his strength.
So the king returned.
Yes, late 2022.
A dramatic comeback.
Leading a right-wing coalition.
More right than before.
It felt like a step backward.
Not everyone celebrated.
Not at all.
There was fear.
Especially with his legal troubles.
And his authoritarian tendencies.
2023 saw those protests.
Huge protests across Israel.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
What were they protesting?
Netanyahu's judicial reforms.
They saw them as an attack,
On the judiciary.
an attempt to grab power.
A threat to democracy.
And it was more than just the reforms.
In the direction.
Netanyahu was taking Israel.
It was a boiling point.
Two visions for Israel.
Wow.
And then Netanyahu fired his defense minister.
Yoav Gallant
He had criticized the reform
warned about the risks.
to Israel's security.
Even within the government.
There was pushback
It was a sign.
of how deep the divisions were.
Gallant's firing triggered a strike.
A general strike.
Shut down the country.
A moment of crisis
For-
facing so much opposition.
So what did he do?
Did he back down?
He did.
Temporarily.
He paused the reforms.
Agreed to negotiate.
With the opposition.
A win for the protesters.
But the tension remained.
The fear remained
And all this was happening.
with a changing region.